Hello and welcome back to Watching Brief for the week of the 7th of April 2025. I'm joined as ever by my co-host, Mr. Andy Brockman. And today we have a couple of stories that are unfolding we want to bring to your attention. And it's kind of part of an ongoing theme, really, within archaeology world, unfortunately. But for one of the stories in particular, we weren't quite sure what angle to take on it.
There's at least 30.
At least 30. Terrible joke. So do you want to start with that story then?
I will.
Okay.
Dear viewer, in case we're being, as usual, completely obscure and up ourselves.
They're obtuse. It's an angle. Obtuse.
with sort of
or are we just being too acute?
With knobs on.
Oh yeah, go on. There you go. Yeah. Oh, hey, I like it. Sorry, go on. Put them out of their misery.
Look, okay, I should put our viewer out of their misery.
Mm-hmm.
What we're talking about is an archaeological story, and it was actually on the face of it was a good news archaeological story. It's about a fascinating find made in the east of England by a group called the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group, which is a local research group based in Lincolnshire. Now, people might remember about a year ago, in May 2024, I think it was, the story went viral that the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group had found a not unprecedented, but certainly very rare and fascinating object. It is a kind of object. It's from the Roman period. It's made of metal.
Mm-hmm.
They're often quite decorated. They have multi-angles and they have round knobs on the outside and so on.
And how many faces do they have?
They're called dodecahedrons. It's
12,
a mathematical.
12 faces.
Thank you. Yeah. 12 faces, 30. 12 faces, 30 odd angles.
Yeah. I've got one here.
Now, I have to stress, by the way, dear viewer, and particularly for the benefit of the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group, the model that Marc is holding is not a model of your dodecahedron.
No.
Okay.
No. This
nothing to do with your dodecahedron. It is there for illustrative purposes only of a dodecahedron.
3D printed and modelled by a friend. Yes.
Yeah. Please don't write to us about it.
No.
Or strike us down from YouTube or anything like that. I'll come on to that in a minute because that's what this story is really about. But basically, when the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group announced this find, it went viral. The media picked it up. They ultimately got a slot on Dig for Britain with Professor Ellis Roberts, the BBC's flagship archaeology magazine programme. And if you go to the group's website now, it's front and centre, particularly front and centre of their campaign to raise funds for continuing their work. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But where this starts to get interesting is now, right back at the beginning of the story, people were asking questions about this find because there were sort of gaps in the public knowledge, shall we say. It's record. It was the find was announced. It was announced that it had turned up in the course of their work in an archaeological trench in context. But it appears that a local contracting unit called Allen Archaeology was associated with the find and excavate in the context of the find. It was a little bit ambiguous as to whether the find was made initially by, for example, a metal detectorist who we know, Norton Disney have said they work with local metal detectorists, and there's nothing wrong with that either.
No.
It's perfectly legal as long as they're working with permission of the landowner. But it was a little bit ambiguous as to whether, say, the find had turned up in the course of a metal detector survey and then was subsequently excavated archaeologically.
Okay.
Or the context of the find was excavated archaeologically once the significance of the find was recognised, that it was one of these rare objects. That's never been made clear.
Mm.
And again, apologies to the Norton Disney Group if I'm, going off on one there by speculating like that. But they haven't made it clear.
No. And to be clear, you have reached out for comment, haven't you? So in that sense,
I'll come back to that later, but yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. I reached out to Norton Disney for comment before we recorded this, and I specifically asked that question about how the find actually came about. As we'll hear in generally later, I've not had any comment back from them or other people that we've talked to, and I'll talk about that in a minute.
It's a pattern. It's a growing pattern. People just don't comment anymore. What does this matter? Why should we particularly care how it was found?
Okay, now this started. This latest iteration of the story began as what's often known as a copyright strike.
Okay,
that somebody and a member of the Norton Disney Group actually gave an interview to the BBC when this story broke last week, explaining that they routinely look for the Norton Disney Dodecahedron on interweb searches. They look for mentions of it.
Yeah, okay.
And they came across a guy in America who was 3D printing a copy, he said, or had 3D printed a copy of this particular object, and it was being sold using, and this is where it sounded like a normal copyright strike, using photographs from the Norton Disney Group without their permission.
And so the photos were being used to promote the 3D printed object.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, the gentleman concerned said that he meant absolutely no offence. It was he was selling it at cost. He just thought he made it out of for himself, out of interest, he said, and decided that somebody else might want to enjoy it in future, and was selling it. Yeah. Again, so far so not very unusual. And again, the use of other people's photographs to sell stuff on eBay, other marketing sites are available. It's not that unusual. You often hear stories of photographs that are either not of the object concerned or have been taken from someone else's website or whatever. Yeah, this is pretty common. Should have been pretty easy to sort out.
But is it? Well, why wasn't it easy to sort out?
Because of what happened next.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, if you go onto the Norton Disney website,
yeah,
there is a page for the Roman dodecahedron.
Yep, looking at it.
Yep. And until probably it would appear the end of last week, it included a link to the entry for the Norton Disney Dodecahedron on the Portable Antiquities Scheme website. The publicly available, free to access database of the publicly funded British Museum curated Portable Antiquities Scheme. It is no longer there. That entry has been taken down.
Is that?
And if you go on,
how do you do that? Is that easy to do?
Well, I've asked the British Museum what the mechanism is for taking something down from the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and also the ethics of it, because it's a publicly available database. It's been published, and it is being if, for example, it had been taken down by a third party, and I'm not blaming Norton Disney for this, but I think certain factors, certain circumstantial factors point to the fact that it was Norton Disney that was behind the takedown. I think we have to ask questions about the integrity of a database where somebody can have a find taken off it at will when it's been when it's been published.
Yeah.
And
so did you actually get get an answer then, as far as that goes, or not?
Not yet.
Right. Okay.
Now, I'm hoping that the fact that we're publishing this story will prompt Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group and the Portable Antiquities Professor Michael Lewis of the Portable Antiquities scheme at the British Museum. I hope it might prompt them to actually just level with us what's gone on here,
rather than just saying pass.
I see what you did there.
Oh yeah.
I really think we should stop punishing our viewer this afternoon.
I'm really sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Look, no. In all seriousness,
no, it doesn't matter.
Until the beginning of this week, so the Norton Disney page had a link to the Portable Antiquities scheme entry. That page has been changed so that the line with the link, the sentence including the link, is no longer there. And at the British Museum end, it's been taken down.
Just to be clear, if it's no longer on the Portable Antiquities scheme database and the line is missing from the Norton Disney website, presumably that's going to be done with the knowledge, at the very least, of the Norton Disney group. It's not that someone else has asked for this to be taken down, or that the database has independently done it, because presumably I'm not sure someone would take the time to notify anyone who's linking to it that it's no longer a live link. So I think that's important just to note that, isn't it? That
it's very important just to note that. This appears to have happened simultaneously. And if you go to the Portable Antiquities scheme website now, the record under the serial, the catalogue number of the object is listed as not available, and it's listed as quarantined. Now, I've asked again the Portable Antiquities scheme at the British Museum, what is their definition of quarantined on their database? We can speculate, but it's not fair to speculate. So that, it clearly has a meaning. Again, they've not come back to us. So basically, we've had an object, information about which was publicly available on the leading open database for archaeological finds made by members of the public in the UK, and it is no longer there. It has become an unobject.
Is it? I suppose it raises two immediate questions for me. One of them would be, I wonder what happens to that accession number. Is it reassigned, or for the sake of completeness, do they just have these? If there are more of these of such unobjected objects out there, do they just have it as a blank? And then the second question is, obviously, I wonder how many more times we might find that this has happened to this database as a national record.
We're only at the beginning of this particular journey, I think. But this does raise a lot of questions. Now, at the root of this, I think, going back to the beginning of where this story began, it began with a copyright strike. And this all appears to be about intellectual property. If you look at the original entry on the Portable Antiquities database, as I say, I was able to obtain it from
your friends at the CIA, Andy. Just say it.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes. But yeah, my spooky friends.
Yeah.
But basically, this went out under a CC-BY attribution Creative Commons license.
Yeah.
Right. So publicly available, publicly repeatable. Right.
With attribution, typically.
With attribution. So long as you attribute the source of the information, you can reuse it.
Yeah.
Right. Now, it has a catalogue number, an accession number, as you say, for the PAS, and workflow status published green flag. So this is basically at the end of the PAS process. This is where it goes up on the database, right? Now, again, I'll just see what the entry says. It says the object was discovered during a controlled archaeological investigation by a local history and archaeology group and Allen Archaeology, and was recovered from a pit described by the excavators as a quarry infilled with debris as a midden. And then it goes on to put on the record artifacts that were found in association, they say. Now, you can hear that in that line. There is a slight ambiguity about the actual location and circumstances, right? Then, really interesting comment. The object has not been handled by the recorder. So the person that entered this on the PAS database hadn't seen or handled the object, right? Had seen the object in photographs, but hadn't handled the object. And the photographs were submitted by a researcher called Lorena Hitchens, who is doing a PhD on and is an expert on dodecahedra, and in fact appeared on the Dig for Britain package.
Okay.
It describes it as a casting. It describes its associations with other dodecahedra from known typologies. It describes the decoration, and crucially, it gives measurements. So, for example, it says height 80 millimeter without knobs (bracket), 70 without knobs 70 millimeter, width 86 millimeter without knobs 75 millimeter, and weight 254 grams. Side length of face is 27 millimeter.
That's quite big. That's almost twice the size of this one, actually, if not a little bit more.
Yeah. It's a biggie. It talks about XRF testing, which is a standard, non-invasive way of testing metal objects for their content. It says it's probably later in the Roman period because there's a very low zinc content, and zinc was becoming unavailable in Roman Britain. But there's and then it lists references, but then it makes a very interesting and rather unusual comment. Notes: inquiries relating to the creation of 3D models. Please note that a license from the private owner of that object is required before creating and distributing a 3D model of the dodecahedron. However, the owner is choosing to remain anonymous. There will be a published report that will be submitted to Lincolnshire Historic Environment Record, although again, the report will still be copyrighted by its authors. So again, permission is required to use that data for any models.
Okay.
And then it says this is a find of note and has been designated regional importance.
Okay.
Now, obviously, that opens up the whole can of worms of copyright. And there is an increasing concern among some researchers, some archaeological researchers, that museums and individuals are gatekeeping artifacts and preventing them from being fully discussed by independent researchers. Added to the fact that in this case, it's being used as a focus for fundraising for the Norton Disney Group. Now, again, so nothing wrong with that, nothing illegal about it. But in terms of archaeological ethics, it's starting to sail very close to the line. And in fact, just yesterday, Dr. Tess Mackling, who is an expert in Iron Age talks in particular and metalwork of this period, published a paper expressing concern about this very issue, and pointing out that, for example, people are not publishing PhDs or are not publishing photographs of finds that they've taken themselves for PhDs because museums are asserting copyright.
Yeah.
And saying that, for example, you cannot publish a photograph of an object in their collection that you've taken because it has to be retaken by their own photographer. Oh, and by the way, we're going to charge you 100 quid for it or 200 quid for it or whatever. Now, this is an area that has become a vexed one in the art world. The argument is that, for example, why should the public pay to reproduce a photograph of something in a free-to-enter, publicly funded museum?
Yeah, why should the British Museum exclusively get to make jigsaws of the Rosetta Stone, for example?
That's exactly it.
Yeah,
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Now, people who
and actually, can we just take that one step further? Because ultimately, no one at the British Museum made the Rosetta Stone.
Precisely.
And actually in this instance, no one who found the Dodecahedron is responsible for its creation. They simply found it. So it's
Well, the other point is that the landowner wishes to remain anonymous,
and yet wishes to assert control over looking at it, seemingly.
Yeah.
Well,
again, this is where it gets slightly ambiguous. I mean, the Dodecahedron has been on a sort of regional tour. It's currently at the Civil War Centre in Newark. It has been seen in other museums. So, it's not that it's being kept from the public. What Dr. Mackley and others who share these concerns say is that the detailed information that researchers need is being controlled. Access to that information is being controlled. And, in a sense, I've just, by reading that entry from the PAS database that has now been taken down, I've put back into the public domain some of the information that the complaint is it's being controlled inappropriately by the Norton Disney Group.
And ultimately, why is this possibly the case? If that's me, obviously we don't know for certain, but why would? I mean, to be blunt, why else does an archaeology group exist if not to find things and then describe those things? That's the tradition of archaeology and publishing finds. That's basically one of the few definitely actual tangible outcomes of archaeology. So why is this becoming a trend?
Well, I think there's two reasons. One is that this whole issue of intellectual property and intellectual property in the museum and archaeology world is a live one. There are different points of view. People who accept the status quo or argue for the status quo, people like some of the museums and galleries, for example, say, it's a legitimate income stream for them. They have to curate, they have to, handle security, the insurance, and all the rest of it. And they in these times of restricted funding and decreasing funding in many cases, they have to look to any funding stream they've got. They can't just fund a thing on a cafe, So that comes into it, I think. What Dr. Macklin says in her paper, though, is that the whole commodifying of the past through the system of what are often called in quotation marks rewards through the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and particularly through the Treasure Act, basically tells the public this stuff has a monetary value that actually overrides its educational, intellectual, historical value. It begins as a commodity, and then the access is to the commodity subsequently.
Well, and this is where my frustration with the TV series Metal Detectorists comes in, or Detectorists comes in. The open, constant use of terminology like prize money. It hasn't come from nowhere. It's come from research, and that research has been done in communities that use that terminology. In that sense. But it's interesting when that is bleeding into and forming the economic reality. And I guess the socio-economic reality of museums, of individual archaeology groups, perhaps even of individual archaeologists as well. So yes, as you say, there's nothing wrong, but there might be something wrong. Perhaps. Yeah.
Well, but let's put it better. That nothing illegal has happened.
No.
Right. There is absolutely no evidence that anybody has behaved inappropriately. But what may be happening here is an inappropriate assertion of exclusivity in a realm which should be open to everybody. The Portable Antiquities Scheme, as I say, it publishes under Creative Commons. It makes itself available to anybody who wants to look at it. And if you're a bona fide researcher, you can get access to the detailed database for every find on the database, except it appears now this one and maybe others. I say I'll be following that up. But the idea that a significant find, one of, there's less than 20, I think it is, certainly in this country, have been found. Others in other parts of Europe and Germany and so other former provinces of the Roman Empire. But and whether it was for ritual or whether it was for knitting socks, they're fascinating objects.
Wasn't for knitting, especially not at that size. Not for knitting.
Don't
say it.
The point is, we're either a profession, a culture which shares, or we're one which restricts and gatekeeps. This is, in a sense, this is as serious as the academic publishers who put something behind, a 4-page article behind a $30 paywall. This is preventing. In fact, at least that one you can buy your way into. Yeah. This one, as things stand at the moment, and I checked just before we went to record. It's just a non-object. It's a quarantined object, according to PAS.
Which is also the status of so many artifacts that have found their way into private collections. There are artifacts that we know exist. Sometimes, for example, from photographic evidence from back in the 60s or something, that seemingly now are in private collections in the US or in for example, China or in the Middle East, this kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Which generally speaking is anathema, as you say, to why archaeologists do what they do. Just briefly, just very quickly, just for devil's advocate, why shouldn't they monetize this, to the moon and back? Why shouldn't they say? Why shouldn't they make a badge that says this is our icon, this is our thing, us, we found it, we deserve this? What's wrong with that?
Right, couple of things. First of all, there's absolutely nothing wrong with them, making 3D printed models of the thing and selling them to fundraise. And if somebody copied that, that would be a legitimate copyright complaint. But as I think friend of the show, Paul Barford, who in fact was ahead of the game on this and was asking questions about the precise circumstances of what was going on a year ago when the story first broke. But how can you assert intellectual copyright in something when the person that made it died more than 1,500 years ago? Copyright in this country lasts for 75 years after the death of the creator. So then it becomes.
Well, and also, how do you assert that copyright when the person doesn't want to be named as well? Presumably, if copyright is being asserted or has been asserted in the case of the eBay listing, it was done on behalf of the Norton Disney group, I guess.
Well, again, we need to see the internal comms to eBay and to the British Museum and so on. But certainly the fact that the Norton Disney website has been changed at the same time, it would appear, as Portable Antiquities Scheme database where the entry was removed, suggests that yes, the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group are, if not the prime mover in this, are the agent in this.
So benefiting from the use of that legal framework, but without really being fully subject to what other people have to be subject to. So, for example, if you want to copyright a book, there has to be a named author. If you want to have a copyright on, I mean, I suppose museums, for example, as I say, the British Museum does copyright. Another one would be the prints of things like the Great Wave, etc. Copies of that prints on behalf of an organisation. But those are parts of a collection, which, again, it's this is why I say it's not wrong, but it's also not great, because you can see how they've got there, but it's really not. It's not in the spirit of of
No,
that. Yeah.
and I would say, as the reason of, and obviously we've been talking about this for a few days now, haven't we? In prepping, and at the beginning you were even saying, well, what's the story? It's about
Well,
photographs, intellectual property, and so on.
yeah, and so let me just explain that.
Please do, because I don't want to misrepresent what
Yeah,
you're saying.
no. I mean, because to be fair, folks at home, I do legitimately see what. Yeah, the question is, why is this a story? In so much as it's possible within the as I say, the legal and intellectual property protections framework that is afforded to situations like this. It's not illegal. It's not wrong. It's not. You see, and this is the problem: is I'm using the word wrong. And wrong is a very broad thing, in that sense. It's not legally an infringement, but it may well be. It's certainly ethically distasteful, I would say, perhaps, depending on the circumstances. But also, just as someone, for example, if you want to get your hands on it to research it, or if you just want to be able to look at it and get a sense of it, you've got and you think that you're working with fellow enthusiasts. It's a step beyond simply being sort of ethically, and it feels more like, it feels greedy. It feels a touch desperate in that sense. And I guess maybe there's a broader question here to be answered about why it is that museums, why it is that, for example, the British Museum feels the need to leverage its artifacts in a copyrighted way. And the reason basically comes down to funding and money, I suppose. So
it's interesting as well. It's interesting as well. If you take the analogy, for example, the works of Charles Dickens are out of copyright and have been for a very, very long time. So anybody can produce an edition of a Dickens novel and illustrate it and do all things. The new illustrations would be copyright to you if you created that edition. But the text is public domain. Because it was created, more than a century ago, nearly 1.5 centuries ago now. So and copyright is notoriously complicated. It varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and the lawyers who specialise in it are some of the most expensive on the planet, apart from the corporate people.
And therefore, and I believe Tess points this out, that the use of the photographs is clearly a copyright violation because the photograph has been produced by a third party.
Yeah.
So it's a sticky wicket in that sense. It's not easy to take apart this one because of the delights of copyright law. Yeah. I suppose what's the ultimate destination for this sort of find, in this sort of situation?
That's again, that is one of the great ambiguities of this particular story. It's not, as far as we're aware, been donated to any particular museum. As I say, it's done something of a regional tour. It's appeared in Lincoln Museum, I think, and currently at Newark. So it's appeared in public. It's appeared on television. It's not that they've tried to hide the existence of it. You could go to Newark Museum Civil War Centre today, and you could see it. You could even take a photograph of it, probably.
Then why not have a description of it on the Portable Antiquities scheme?
Precisely.
Or the HCR
this
database.
appears. Yeah, exactly. This appears to be a sort of. Hesitate to use the word paranoia, but certainly an overreaction. That because somebody has done something inappropriate, unquestionably taking somebody's photographs without permission and publishing them is inappropriate, if not illegal.
But also these days on the internet, it's not a cardinal sin. It's just something that happens all the time, and you're well within your rights to request that they take down the photo. But it doesn't mean that you don't have to rush to all public mentions of the object and wipe them from the internet.
What this appears to be about is people can combine the published dimensions with the photographs and come up with a facsimile. Now, again, as Tess Mackling points out, a 3D printed model that you might buy for a few quid for your child on a museum visit because it's interesting and fun, there's a hell of a lot of difference between that and a museum quality replica made by a metalworker, which can actually be a research tool. You know, so that there's gradations here as well. And so,
well, but
I mean, the
also as
short answer,
well,
you say what?
but also as well, things like thickness of material, you know, the
Yeah.
precise. I think they mention the lead, tin, copper alloy mixture on the website in terms of percentages.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, there are so many more specifics than just those outer dimensions.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna ask a question here, and that is it at all possible? Because if this wasn't an archaeology group doing this, I definitely would have asked this question already. Is it at all possible that someone is trying to sell it?
Yes.
Right.
And I say that simply because we can't say they're not.
Right.
The red flags are the fact that the landowner, ultimate owner, beneficial owner, what term you want to use, wants to remain anonymous. And the fact that the circumstances of the find are still ambiguous. And this is absolutely the kind of object that an auction house would pick up. And in fact, again, prepping for this particular package, I did some hunting around, and again, thanks to Paul Barford, who monitors these things very carefully. He pointed out that at Wilkinson's in Doncaster in December 2022, a dodecahedron like this one, superficially like this one, appeared for sale with an estimate of £800 to £1,200. It didn't have a provenance or a collection history. On that occasion, as I say, only 3 years ago, it sold for £33,000.
33,000.
Yes.
Wow. And that's a whole other kettle of fish. Why it is that old bits of metal sell for so much. That's something else for another day.
Yeah.
But in that sense, I guess if there was a sale in its future, and again, feel free to correct us if we're speculating wildly here, folks.
Yeah.
If there was a sale in its future, you could argue that having been featured on a national TV program, having had a PAS listing, and having had such notoriety due to the copyright strike, its value and therefore what people know about it and therefore its value, people might get recognition in that sense, has increased. Yeah, and this is, we know this is also actually how auctioneers increase the value of things. They create a row about it, and then it gets eyes on, as it were. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But of course, we should say there's no sign that this isn't listed in an auction house. Yeah, there's no sign that this is going to be sold. But it's just interesting, all of these things coming together. Yeah.
A lot of this story is about people either not commenting, or certainly we're researching in the negative. We're saying this hasn't been said. They haven't said it is going to be donated to Lincoln Museum, for example. It's the main regional museum.
And to be fair, they haven't said that that they're not going to send it to the moon.
No, exactly. That's exactly the point. But the point is, there's no, and I think this is particularly the point why I wanted to chase this story up with regards to the Portable Antiquities scheme. There is a lack again of transparency and accountability. So far, I mean, the PAS, I contacted them just under 2 days ago. I explained when we were recording, and in fact, if they contacted us after recording, that we would amend any or add notes to any recordings or deal with their, publish their comments subsequently. So that we are being absolutely transparent in what we're doing. They aren't. Again, please contact us and clarify these issues, because people are concerned. And I think people are concerned about the precedent, because certainly as far as the Portable Antiquities scheme is concerned, we only really noticed this and this takedown because it's such a high profile object. How many other objects have been subject to a takedown? And when something's on a public database, surely that's it. It's been published. It's been it's been legal. It's been published. Or is the Portable Antiquities Scheme saying basically the data is not owned by the PAS, it's actually owned by the reporter? Because that's quite that's not made clear.
And actually, just to follow that a little bit further, if it is owned by the person doing the reporting or the owner of the artifact, then what's the limit on that? Is there, what's the copyright on that?
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. Does it? Can you transfer that ownership?
To be honest, those are the foothills of an issue I've not even begun to scale in terms of this yet. But I suspect before we finish talking about this, we'll be trying to clarify all those things. Yeah.
I suppose one final thing I'd say about this is that it is part of what we've identified previously on this show, and that is within the realm of academia, broader academia, a sort of creeping corporatization, a sort of corporate attitude that everything has a value. That value must be defended jealously and guarded against other people profiting from the value of the thing that you are perceived to own. And if you're not perceived to own it in its entirety, then you must fight to make sure that perception changes. It's part of an ugly, broader, I would say, cultural problem. Everything has to have a monetary value, and everything has to be monetizable in that sense.
Yeah.
But also because we're dealing with, in this instance, as you say, publicly available and published information, it's and also because of the nature of not having to report a deletion from that database, it leaves a great big question mark, and it's going to be interesting to see where this goes, I guess.
I should probably make clear as well that, and particularly people who follow my Blue Sky feed will know that I am an absolute defender of intellectual property and copyright where it's appropriate. For example, I think what Meta have done in using an effectively a pirated database to train its Llama AI model stinks. And the fact that we know that senior officials at Meta discussed obtaining licenses and decided that if they got a license from one, they'd have to get a license for all, and it was just too much trouble and too expensive. We know one of the richest companies on the planet. That is genuinely exploitative.
Well, and presumably it leads to people being this paranoid. So in the best case scenario, what Disney Norton have done is respond very strongly, very broadly to the perception of an intellectual property weakness that could be, for example, taken advantage of by a group like Meta.
And just to finish, there's a heck of a difference, I think, in terms of intellectual property between a creative, somebody like me for that matter, somebody like you making something out of, moving it from there through your hands out there onto the screen or whatever. There's a hell of a difference between that process of creation and having the good luck to find something that was made 1,500 or more years ago.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so. But then again, I haven't found something, so of course I'd say so.
Yeah.
What's the other thing that we want to quickly just point people to this week?
And it is quick because there are sort of legal constraints around what we can say about this. Now, as regular followers of the Watching Brief will know, we've often covered stories about metal detecting and the, shall we say, questionable activities of some people involved in metal detecting. and in particular issues around metal detecting rally companies who've been accused of all sorts of things over the past number of years.
Accused
To the
and
extent,
prosecuted
well, this is the point.
in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, and even Professor Michael Lewis of the Portable Antiquities Scheme, who we mentioned in the last package, co-authored an article in Current Archaeology, British Archaeology, with Mike Hayworth, the previous director of the CBA, Council of British Archaeology, where they talked about metal detecting rallies as being something that needed to be controlled. Because of the potential impact on the historic environment and the ability to recover objects and gain knowledge from objects that were recovered from the historic environment. That issue has only become more pertinent. People might remember last year we did an interview with a metal detecting rally organizer called Jay Price. We covered that story where he argued that metal detecting rallies had become too big and were out of control and needed some form of licensing or some form of regulation. He thought that they were on the way out as a practical consideration. Now, what has happened this spring so far is that a former rally organizer has just been convicted of an unusual offence called theft by finding. That person is going forward to sentencing at the Crown Court, date to be announced. It appears to be connected with metal detecting activity. Somebody being moved from a magistrate's court where the case is heard to the Crown Court suggests that the authorities are asking for a sentence that is greater than a magistrate's court can actually dispose of, convict someone of. So we'll watch out for that one and report on it as soon as the process is complete. Just a couple of days ago, there was yet another arrest that was reported on the BBC. A metal detectorist in their 40s near Downham Market in Norfolk was arrested by a rural crime team. A metal detector and coins were seized, and the person was questioned and released on bail pending further investigations. The term night hawking was used for unlawful metal detecting. I never use the term night hawking. I mean, people who quote night hawk are actually thieves. They're on land illegally trying to steal objects, and that's the way the law treats them these days. They're not just charged with heritage offences; they're charged with things like theft and criminal damage. So I think it's important we use the right terminology here and don't try and sugarcoat it by giving them some sort of sense of being sort of somehow romantic outlaws, cocking a snook at the authorities. And in fact, I'm aware of, for example, a case in South Yorkshire where a farmer trying to intervene with metal detectorists on their land illegally was actually attacked.
Yeah.
So this is serious stuff. There's serious criminality involved. And we're seeing
but as with questions of copyright, there's serious criminality involved because there's also potential for serious money as well.
Of course, and that's where the last element of this particular story comes in. Yesterday evening, now I've been aware of this story for a week or so now because it's been doing a lot. It's been doing the rounds on metal detecting social media. But I'm not going to name the company for reasons which will become obvious in a moment. But there have been allegations made about a particular company we'll put it this way, holding a charity rally. And then when somebody checked with the charity that was meant to be receiving the donations, they'd never heard of this particular organisation and hadn't received any money. So the allegation was potentially one of fraud. And the yesterday, the National Council for Metal Detecting issued the following statement, and I'm just going to read it and then leave it there because it'll become obvious why in a moment. There has been much speculation across social media regarding a detecting group and a number of charitable donations. I have today been in discussion with all parties and can confirm that there is a live police investigation that is ongoing. I would therefore ask that all detecting groups and individuals cease all discussion on this matter until the police investigation is concluded. This is important because it could hamper the investigation. The facts can then be made public. And it goes out over the signature, Alan Tamblyn, General Secretary of the National Council for Metal Detecting. Now, as far as I'm aware, that statement is almost unprecedented in that the NCMD does not normally comment on issues relating to metal detecting and alleged criminality. The only thought I would leave our viewer with, without commenting on that particular case in any kind of detail, and certainly not identifying the people allegedly involved, if the NCMD is issuing a statement like that, they are pretty concerned about the potential implications for their hobby.
Okay, well, that's been a watching brief. It's certainly been a watching brief where I suppose archaeology, artifacts, and value, both intellectual and intrinsic, have been discussed. If any other stories are in your purview or in your field of awareness, please do let us know. Comment below if you want us to talk about something in particular, if you want to bring something to our attention. We'll obviously keep an eye on these and also other related stories. For example, there are ongoing cases of interest connected to the Portable Antiquities scheme, which surely to goodness must be getting close to some sort of resolution at some point soon, hopefully, but we'll see. So yeah, we always keep an eye on this stuff. We'll always report on it, but also as well, let us know if there's something that you think that we've missed or that you're aware of. You can contact us directly and indeed securely. Just check out the Pipeline website in particular for options there. And finally, of course, do consider supporting us on Patreon. For this sort of reporting takes time and effort, and Andy's been very busy this week. So at the very least, a Ko-fi or a nice pasty in his direction would be very much appreciated. Thank you for watching, guys, and thank you again for your time, Andy, this week. Cheers.
Thank you, and don't forget as well, if to like, share, and subscribe to Archaeo Soup and to the Watching Brief channel on YouTube. See you next time.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.